We celebrate the fast ascent of top-tier companies and the brilliant founders who built them. But beneath the public milestones lies a heavy, hidden toll. Data from the Gallup Healthways Well-Being Index reveals entrepreneurs report higher rates of psychological distress than standard employees, 34% reporting persistent worry, 45% daily stress. Compounding this, Harvard Business School research shows 3 out of 4 venture-backed startups fail outright. Despite these high stakes, leaders operate in a culture where displaying vulnerability is effectively forbidden. The confident optimism projected to employees and investors often serves as a functional mask. Behind it, a psychological system is frequently pushed to the absolute edge of collapse. Psychiatrists identify this behavior as impression management, the exhausting, continuous performance of faking absolute competence while internally managing extreme panic. Consider a metaphor favored by executives: a man riding a lion. To the outside observer, the image projects dominance, a brave leader who has tamed a dangerous beast. Internally, the rider is quietly terrified, frantically wondering how to avoid being eaten alive. This extreme professional distress is a direct mechanical result of clinical perfectionism interacting with a specific biological temperament. By relying on impression management, the founder becomes completely isolated. They trap themselves in a silent, destructive loop, one that we must clinically deconstruct to understand how they can survive it. To deconstruct this system, we first need to examine the biological baseline of a high achiever. We start with a specific psychiatric temperament known as hypomania. Hypomania provides the immense energy required to build a company against highly unfavorable odds. It fuels the unusual ambition and boundless drive of successful founders. This visual maps the psychiatric spectrum.
Hypomania sits in the middle. It's a milder iteration of clinical mania, sharing the exact physiological architecture of manic depression. This places high achievers in a precarious biological position, hovering perilously close to severe mood disorders. Because of this shared architecture, the most motivated and creative founders are also most likely to experience profound despair and a total loss of motivation. The very biological engine that drives extreme entrepreneurial success is inherently volatile. To avoid a fatal psychological crash, that engine requires a perfectly calibrated cognitive steering system. That cognitive steering mechanism, the framework that directs this volatile biological drive, is perfectionism. We need to discard the common professional misconception that perfectionism is simply the healthy pursuit of excellence. In cognitive behavioral therapy, perfectionism is mapped as a rigid, multi-part cognitive feedback loop. It is a system that systematically generates psychological distress. The first node in this loop is the relentless striving for extremely high, personally demanding standards. To an outside observer, these standards are highly unreasonable given the actual circumstances. High standards alone are not toxic. It is the unyielding, inflexible framework they are placed within that weaponizes those standards against the individual. The toxicity comes into focus when we look at the second component of the clinical definition. This node is self-worth. Perfectionists judge identity exclusively on achieving unrelenting standards. Tying identity to output means any mistake becomes a devastating strike. This leads to cost ignorance, ignoring debt, insomnia, and isolation to continue the pursuit, locking the system into a closed loop. When a highly driven person with a volatile hypomanic engine locks into this rigid framework, they literally cannot permit themselves to exit the system, even as it actively destroys them. Tying identity directly to professional output establishes an incredibly fragile psychological architecture. It turns everyday business hurdles into literal existential threats. This cognitive loop inevitably creates real-world operational fallout, a phenomenon clinical researchers term the paradox of perfectionism. The paradox is straightforward. The extreme drive to optimize and maintain these unrelenting standards actually impairs physical performance and destroys business value. Look at this performance output graph. As effort increases, output initially rises steadily. But when standards transition from high to unrelenting, performance drops off a steep cliff. This drop-off is driven by maladaptive clinical behaviors, extreme overcompensating, hoarding resources, and constantly seeking reassurance.
These specific behaviors actively throttle company growth. The founder might delay critical product launches out of a fear that they aren't perfect yet, or they might alienate their own teams through an absolute failure to delegate tasks. Perfectionism acts as an operational vulnerability that directly sabotages the success the founder is desperately trying to achieve. We can now synthesize the two primary mechanisms we've explored: the biological hypomanic engine and the cognitive perfectionist steering wheel. Let's return to the metaphor of the man riding the lion, but analyze it through our newly established clinical framework. The lion itself represents the unpredictable, volatile energy of the hypomanic edge, combined with uncontrollable market forces. The internal terror of the rider is the direct result of the perfectionistic cognitive loop, the belief that if he falls off, his self-worth drops entirely to zero. When you force a highly volatile biological drive through a rigid, unforgiving cognitive framework, the internal friction creates a predictable path toward burnout. Remaining ignorant of these systemic mechanics leads directly back to the tragic statistics of anxiety, depression, and enterprise failure that we see across high-achieving populations. Surviving this high-stakes environment without breaking down requires a structural fix. The clinical solution involves rebuilding the architecture of your cognitive loop. The adaptive alternative allows you to maintain the healthy pursuit of excellence, but you must forcefully decouple your core self-worth from the achievement of those outcomes, allowing your identity to remain balanced and secure regardless of output fluctuations. Acknowledging this vulnerability and dropping the exhausting facade of impression management is the crucial first step to stabilizing the system. Dismantling the perfectionist loop is a strategic requirement for long-term endurance and peak performance. True high performance requires recognizing that you are the architect of your cognitive systems, not just a terrified passenger riding a lion.